For me, this volume of the Socialist Register I think takes off from a paradox that we first noted in the 2011 volume. It's something that's been widely noted now, and that unlike the other three great crises of capitalism, this one so far has not spurred anything like a radical left surge. Unlike the one of the 1880s, which gave birth to the Second International Parties, the Great Union Movement of that time period, unlike the interwar crisis that gave birth to the revolution in Russia and the popular fronts of the 1930s, unlike the upsurge of the 1970s. In Canada, this is a bit obvious with the hegemony and domination of Harper and Harperism in Canadian politics. But even in Greece, where the left has shown the strongest surge, neoliberalism has not yet been overturned. They're in the fourth year of street fighting. Some 20 general strikes have occurred. And nothing yet has emerged that has overturned this development. I think, though, there is reasons or different signs of optimism in this context that are coming across in a wide range of instances and examples that I think have a moment of also being quite optimistic about the bottom being hit and the trajectory beginning to turn in a different way. Some of this has to do with the retrieval that I think there were many writers in the volume take on of rethinking 20th century socialism. What can be retrieved, what is possible, the defenses of different historical positions and rethinking them for this context, but also a wider moment of experimental heterogeneity. Most of us over the last 2 months have probably participated in aspects of Idle No More, which I think represents some of this moment, like the Quebec student strike, like Occupy. In this case, a historical oppression matched by the neoliberal assault from the two omnibus budget bills on various aspects of Indigenous sovereignty and rights. An amazing tactical mix of round dances, Facebook, blockades. But as the Indigenous writer with the great nickname Zigzag wrote on his blog over the last day or two, there's a lot of strategic questions that remain unanswered. That is, the problem of the bills are still going through, whether the Idle No More movement can continue to sustain itself, whether it can reproduce itself through time, and so on and so forth. A set of the same problems that have existed everywhere, where we're able to pose these kinds of strategic questions, and there's new innovations, but we're still struggling to move on. Some of this is clearly the obstacle that remains in the form that neoliberalism has managed to reconstruct itself in the crisis. In beginning these series of volumes that we kind of laid out a 5-year plan when Vivek and I joined Leo on the board of the Socialist Register. We noted in 2009, 2010, as we were writing those first essays, the defeat of the working class over the period of neoliberalism would leave the possibility of a reconstruction of neoliberalism with something that we were already calling the possibility of permanent austerity. And I think some of those core features are what we're having difficulty confronting, and why this is a longer-term process of left renewal, which we're beginning to see some signs of, what I'll end with. One of them is, of course, the continuous slow growth and stagnation, coupled with increasing inequality, wage compression. Again, the papers today were again showing fallback in the U.S. economy, something we've invented a new term, the triple dip recession, to capture the economic growth problems. We have some of the same problems in the imbalances in the world economy, with still reliant on the U.S. as consumer of last resort, with the dynamics of competitive austerity and competitive devaluation starting to kick in the world economy, particularly with the Japanese efforts at deflation over the last month with the change of government. We have the socialization of debt, the ballooning up of central bank balance sheets as the debt that was in the private sector has been brought into the public, into the bank, into the central banks. This has been remarkable. There are now something like $15 trillion of assets sitting in central banks. These moved from about 5 to 10% of GDP before the crisis. They're now resting at 20 to 30% of GDP. So this is a remarkable ballooning up of central bank assets. They're continuing the process of de-democratization, the security state. A colleague and former student of mine has been calling this armored neoliberalism to capture all the dimensions that have gone into reviving neoliberalism and reconstructing it in this phase. It is clear that neither Keynesianism or the radical arguments for reflation that have particularly been associated with Paul Krugman have gathered or garnered much space in policy circles. Similarly, the social democratic governments, where they were in power, have implemented austerity, whether it was PASOK when in power in Greece or in the coalition now, or in some of the Iberian countries. Even the case of Hollande, who won the election last summer on an anti-austerity program, has been able to do much. He has increased the range of corporate taxes, but this is an agenda overall that remains within the common framework that has been put forward by the European Central Bank and it has been common across Europe. There isn't a systematic break there. It's not possible, I think, to speak of a radical left departure in this moment. But I think there is some rethinking across the left that is showing a range of dimensions where things are consolidating in a different way. I think actually a range of the essays, but also some of the wider thinking that's going on is refreshingly hopeful. Remarkably for me to say, forward-looking, concrete, even practical at times. And I think there are a range of themes across this volume that are in various debates that capture this. One dimension of this is in the realm of ideology, with the insistence in the face of neoliberalism, and this has even gathered a lot of popular support, is the insistence of the idea of communism that has come from Zizek Badeau in this volume, represented by Jody Dean in the discussion of Kalinikos of Badiou's work. I think it's also there in Meg and Jones' essay on their critique of socialist, their critique of Nancy Fraser and their insistence on socialist feminism. I think it's also in the essays in the volume, but also more widely in the thinking that's going on in social movements these days, on the recognition that besides the expansion of what we think of the political and the questions about the transformation of the state, there is the movement away from thinking about just tactics and process to thinking about longer-term strategies, and the difficulty that we've been having in many social movements of reproducing them over time and on a larger scale that's actually able to shift the balance of power. That's evidently what Sam was just speaking about in terms of the union movement and the difficulties inside the union movement addressing that, but it's also the theme that Barbara Epstein raises in her discussion of Occupy. I think a third theme that I would identify is some of the politics related to the state and the question of challenging the different dimensions of challenging state power. Some of these are, as Steve was saying, raising some of the classical questions of an independent socialist organization. How do different component groups work in a front? The essays that deal with by Attilio Boran and Susan Sprong dealing with the national developmentalism and how to push beyond that by forms of new socialism. I think it's also the question about what would constitute workers' governments and the dilemmas posed by that, which is directly found in the discussions of Syriza and De Linke. and also the Italian case. So I think there's some new things being said there. My own essay deals with the economic level and dealing with the question of alternative economic strategies as they've emerged over the crisis. And this is, of course, and quite obviously, had the least traction in public policy debate or in shifting the balance of forces. But paradoxically, I don't think there has been a moment in history where the left has developed as rich an analysis of alternative ideas around socialism. This is partly at the theoretical plane, at dealing with the new theory of the transition to socialism, which has been put forward by, well, going back to Pat Devine's works on democracy and planning, many essays by Leo intervening along these lines, and of course, the writing by Mike Leibowitz that's just in this volume, but also Robin Hanel. Their correlate to this, I think, has actually been a range of practical experiments and the multiple forms of workers' co-ops and workers' enterprises that have been pushed in the last few years in the crisis. Some of this has been the recuperated industries movement that has spread from Argentina outside to the rest of Latin America, but also in a range of other countries. Some of it has been the takeover of factories, some of it, as in Greece, but also a few that have occurred in North America. Some of it has to do with the deepening of the workers' co-op movement everywhere. And it also is the discussion of the communal economy and some of the attempts to deepen that across the Andean zone. More mixed, I think, in terms of the crisis has been the discussion of the programs to directly address the crisis. These have been a relatively eclectic mix of strategy documents. Some of them have been the reflationary programs that have come from the trade union movement, particularly the European Trade Union Congress, which fell in line more or less with the Euro memorandum group that comes out of the party of the European left and represents their program. The best example of that probably was the Left Front program in the French election, which kind of reflected the Euro memorandum strategy. It also has been in a range of programs that have come up from a wide number of coalitions in different countries. The U.S. People's Bailout, the program that came out of the Political Economy Research Institute, out of University of Massachusetts at Amherst, which was integral to the Green New Deal program as it was discussed in the U.S. The Attack European program. These have moved beyond reflationary programs and put a lot about the financial sector control and repression back on the agenda. And finally, I think we could identify the really remarkable documents, and ended up being much more radical than I thought they would be going into the drafting. Was the programs that have come out over the last year from Syriza and De Linke. Very large, detailed programs of plans for socialization. I'm not sure if one would directly call them a transitional program, but certainly the most radical programs that have been put forward from the left since some of the Common Front programs of the 1970s. I think one of the most interesting developments then in the crisis has been a few core positions that have come forward from the left in this moment. And I think that represents a convergence amongst the left on some ideas in around what an alternative exit to the crisis might be. And to some extent, the first things that have probably looked like an alternative program of agreement across wide swaths of the left for some time. Some of that, or a key component of that, has been the calls for debt audits and default that have sprung obviously out of the Greek struggle in particular, but have been spread across Europe. These have been programs that have worked out what a debtor-led default would look like, various notions of monetization and mutualization of the debt by central banks, various strategies around debt default. This has been a program now that has been adopted across much of the party of the European left. What it'll actually mean if, and Leo in his discussion with Baltas in the Register raises some of these questions, what it'll actually mean if Syriza achieves government is still unclear, and this depends upon the balance of forces, but certainly that has become a focal point of a program across the European left. A second theme has been in around bank nationalization and democratic control. key component of that has been taking off with a notion that has its origins within centrist critiques of financialization. That is some notion of returning banks into some, or thinking of banks in terms of a public utility. But this has been expanded with a range of other ideas around financialization in terms of what to do with pension plans, the return of different types of social investment banks, and so on. A third theme, I think, that's been important has been dealing with the cuts in the public sector. And the focal point here, I think, that has been quite inventive was the coupling of various strategies of decommodification, but linking that with strategies of decarbonization. So attempting to fuse the Green New Deal and not a focal point on green entrepreneurialism, but focusing on it in terms of a renewal of the public sector. And coupled with that is typically some notion of a rethinking of what the state would be or might be in that context, particularly a theme that has historically been associated with the Socialist Register, and the writings of Hilary Wainwright pick up that in this volume. Another point has been around the revitalization of workers' plans and green transitions, and how to build up that theme. And finally, in around the question of confronting the world market and the imbalances in the world economy, which deals with various strategies about reasserting control over financial flows in particular. These have particularly gained traction in a range of the peripheral countries, and I think is one of the essential things that'll push the question of Greece getting out of the euro will have to be in around those questions of financial control, because of the dilemmas that will immediately be faced if they start implementing any of their strategy. But it also has been there in a range of the peripheral countries that have been attempting to move in the direction of financial controls as a result of the instabilities of the world market. To conclude, I think when the crisis hit in 2009, 2010, I think there was a range of gross miscalculations on the part of the progressive left when it broke out. Some thinking there was some notion of a simple end to neoliberalism, with an easy return to Keynesianism as a more obvious, logical, and more enlightened policy program to deal with the crisis. That clearly has not occurred. Nor was the thinking that we move in the direction of a more insurrectionary upsurge, or as particularly associated with some thinking with autonomous Marxism, that we've been moving in a transition. We're actually in a transition to communism. Never mind moving towards it in terms of different commoning practices that were prevalent. I think this is a much more difficult time period than that. And what we see, I think, is a coexistence of a lot of contradictory social conflicts. There is still a lot of concessions to austerity and cuts. That was clearly the dilemma or the issue that emerged in the auto sector, which is partly the takeoff point for Sam's essay. There's still the resurgence or space for forms of competitive corporatism, which has been dominating in Europe, in Germany, in both the IG Metall but also the SPD, and it's still a big pull. On the other hand, there has been the building of new left parties in this wreckage, and obviously the Syriza stands as the most important moment. There have been remarkable waves of insurgency with incredible new forms of tactical intervention that have really been inspiring, although they have had difficulty sustaining themselves. That is the Indignados, Occupy, I Don't Know More, UK Uncut, and so forth. And I think finally there is a convergence of the left outside of social democracy around a program that speaks to a range of our aspirations, and is combined with an attempt to deepening our different united fronts, our political alliance, and is the hope for a new left. I think even if we are still in a defensive phase of struggle, I think there are hopeful signs emerging that we've hit the bottom and it's time to have a more optimistic intellect and alongside a more optimistic will. Thank you.
And so say all of us.